Now, counting is at its final stages in the high-stakes runoff election for Turkey's next president. Defeating the incumbency factor and defying the opinion surveys from round one, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is currently leading in the polls, but the margin remains wafer thin. With more than 89% of votes being counted so far, Erdogan is leading with 52% of votes, while his political rival, Kilicdaroglu, has been inching closer to him with over 47%. If Erdogan wins, this will be a fifth consecutive term for the seasoned statesman and also a politician who has been leading Turkey since the last 2 decades. The runoff polls witnessed a massive turnout of over 84%. To give you a background, when Turkey voted last on May 14th, incumbent President Recep Tayyip Erdogan fell short of the 50% mark. And by how much, you ask? Well, by just 0.48% of total votes. So 60 million voters had to cast their votes again today to deliver a clear mandate. Even if Erdogan led the polls on May 14th, it was the toughest electoral challenge for him in the last 20 years. His main rival, Kemal Kilicdaroglu, bagged some 44% votes on May 14th, and the third candidate, Sinan Ogan, bagged the rest 5% of the votes. He was eliminated in the first round itself, of course, but it was argued that amid a deepening economic crisis coupled with poor management after the devastating earthquakes, they were fueling anti-incumbency against Recep Tayyip Erdogan. But final results from round one showed that Erdogan knew the game far too well. Erdogan campaigned on policies including a stronger stance against terrorist groups, sending Syrian refugees back to their homeland, and continuing with his unorthodox economic policies, involving keeping interest rates low despite hyperinflation. While Kilicdaroglu has been campaigning to undo Erdogan's authoritarian tilt, he underlined country's economic troubles with lira hitting a record low of 20 against dollar. He had vowed to return to orthodox economic policy, restore independency of central bank, and dismantle executive presidency in favor of the previous parliamentary system. He also had aims to improve relations with the Western allies, including United States. But just recently, Kilicdaroglu has sharpened his anti-immigrant stance. He aligned with the far-right Victory Party leader Umut Özdağ and promised departure of immigrants. Now, will Kilicdaroglu's recent sharpening of nationalistic tendencies garner more support, or will Erdogan retain his presidency? That remains to be the question. Now, for more on this, our correspondent Lara Villalon has sent us this report from Istanbul.
Polling stations have closed in Turkey, and all the eyes are waiting for this result of the runoff of the presidential elections. There is a lot on stake on these elections. They are counted as the most important elections of this year in the world, where population have to choose between continue trusting in Recep Tayyip Erdogan, that has been 20 years in power, or decide to change the government with Kemal Kilicdaroglu, a social democrat that is backed by a coalition of many different parties. It's almost the whole opposition in Turkey that it's trying to take Erdogan from power. The result of this coming election can change many things, from the economy to foreign relations or human rights and freedom of expression in this country. Reporting from Istanbul, Lara Villalon for WION.
Now, to decode this election further, we are being joined by our guest, Mark Merwitz, who is a political analyst and also a professor at State University of New York Maritime College. Welcome to the broadcast, sir.
Hello.
All right. Now, initial results show that incumbent Erdogan has an edge in this runoff. How are you assessing this once against very, very closely fought poll?
Well, I mean, it's been a very complicated election. I mean, the runoff, as I think was indicated, Erdogan won by 5 points. But what's very important to understand is the polls now are very divergent. There's some polls that show a very close race between Erdogan and Kilicdaroglu, and others. Anadolu poll shows it increasingly in favor of Erdogan. But most recently, in the last few minutes, the Erdogan-Kilicdaroglu difference has been shrinking, and it looks like Erdogan is doing much better. Also, remember, there's a margin of error, which means that the numbers that we have here are plus or minus 3, so they're really very, very close. Why is this the case? Well, in the first election, we have had a candidate, Mr. Oğan, who got 5.2% of the ballot, but he's not in the race. He threw his votes to Erdogan. There was a coalition partner of Oğan, Özda, who threw his votes to Kilicdaroglu. So very confusing. Bottom line is that despite the economy and despite the earthquake and despite all the issues that were raised, it looks like Erdogan will probably squeak through or actually win this outright.
All right. Now, speaking of the man, this election is the biggest test Erdogan has faced in his 2 decades in power. An election this close would have been unthinkable just a few years back. What do you think went wrong for Erdogan?
I say I don't see it that way. Look, the fact of the matter is that it's not inconceivable because the AK Party did lose election in the past. It lost a national parliamentary election, but then it won its majority back, and it actually lost the mayoralty in Istanbul and Ankara. So it's lost elections. What's very important about this election to keep in mind is that it's the people's vote. The numbers are very, very big in terms of turnout, maybe not as big. I haven't seen the latest numbers in terms of the previous election, but people are going to the polls. I mean, can you imagine that they brought someone from a hospital bed to the polls to vote? There's actually, a guy showed up with a Spider-Man outfit. I mean, all the people are running to the polls to vote. They're very, very, very concerned that they should have the right to vote. So this is really the people of Turkey speaking. So, and if you look at the first election, all the pundits were saying Erdogan's going to lose this outright. He's just going to lose it. And it wasn't true. He actually won the first election by 5 points, but he didn't get enough votes to win over the 50%, which he needed to win the presidential election. So the naysayers were wrong. And on this election, I think it is clear to me that based on these preliminary numbers, it looks like Erdogan will win the election because the margin between Kilicdaroglu and Erdogan in Erdogan's favor, even on the opposition poll, shows Erdogan doing much, much better as the polls are counted. I should also mention the speed in which these polls are being calculated is because in the first election, you had parliamentary elections for 23 or 24 candidates. Now you only have a presidential election with 2 candidates. Two candidates, and they're going to count them very quickly.
Right. Mark, let's talk about the other man who's obviously stealing the spotlight, Kilicdaroglu. We talked about what exactly happened with Erdogan and the history and how his party has performed and what exactly went wrong for this particular election. Of course, we are yet to see if at all it went wrong or not. But speaking about Kilicdaroglu, he has not run on the presidential election before, but then he has run on other municipal elections, other local elections, and he has lost most of them. So I'm going to flip the question. What exactly went right for Kilicdaroglu in this one? Because the numbers right now are saying 47.57% of the points are in his favor. So what exactly is going on in Turkey, and why are people in favor of this man who is known to be the Mahatma Gandhi of Turkey?
Well, I mean, Mahatma Gandhi is a very big thing because, look, Kilicdaroglu in the first election was the, rule of law, democracy, etc. But then when he didn't win the election outright, he changed his tone and became a nationalist. In fact, arguing, saying his policy is to throw the Syrian refugees out of Turkey. You can see the posters of Kilicdaroglu's campaign, Suriyeliler gidecek. Syrians go from Turkey. Can you imagine that this was the coalition that was for the rule of law and for democracy, but to be pragmatic now to try to win the election, he now changes his tone. But remember, Erdogan himself never has advocated for the forced expulsion of the Syrian refugees. So I think that it was too little too late for Kilicdaroglu. What you're asking me what he did wrong, I think it's in terms of his ideas for the first election, he wanted to change that very markedly in terms of the election now. And it was too late to do that because the Nationalist Party is affiliated with Erdogan, and he wanted to be a nationalist too. Also, he was trying to get out the Gen Z vote, the young vote. And we don't know the numbers yet, but it doesn't look like he was able to create enough enthusiasm among the young voters. The other problem that he did wrong, but the other hindrance was the alliance affiliation of the coalition supporting Kilicdaroglu, the nation's alliance, with the HDP, which is the Kurdish party. And what Erdogan did in terms of that alliance was to say, look, Kilicdaroglu is allied with the Kurdish terrorists. He is allied with the PKK. So that alliance, which was potentially helpful to Kilicdaroglu to bring out Kurdish voters in his favor, tended to be now very problematic for him in terms of that affiliation. So it was kind of a mixed blessing for Kilicdaroglu. So it's a combination of factors that are really, if Kilicdaroglu loses this, these will be the factors I think that will be key.
All right, Mark, before I let you go, let's look forward a little. Whoever the next president of Turkey is, be that Erdogan, be that Kilicdaroglu, that person will be staring at sky-high inflation and depreciating value of the lira. What do you think is going to be the roadmap going forward?
Tricky question. Look, if Erdogan has a landslide, then he may just continue his economic policies, which is really reducing interest rates, which has been very problematic. This is his idea of how to solve the economy, and that has been problematic. If he wins by a small margin, maybe he might retool and rethink his policy. But at the end of the day, obviously the economy is really a pressing issue, as you say, the problem, the fall of the lira, the problem of the economy. Now, the Turkish economy has also been bolstered by outside sources. The Russians have been very helpful to Turkey in terms of providing free gas and other benefits to the Turkish economy, and also some other Middle East countries have been doing that. But at the long-range policy is a problem. It's hard to predict what Erdogan will do with this, but he really needs to address this issue urgently. But again, look at the election. And I have to tell you, I mean, with all of the economy, the earthquake, all these issues, it looks like Erdogan is going to squeak through or maybe even win a landslide. So it's quite an amazing, extraordinary election in every respect.
All right, Mark, thank you for getting us all those insights. We really appreciate you being on this broadcast.
My pleasure.